Russian gas transit to Europe via Ukraine could be stopped on January the 1st if Moscow and Kiev do not resolve their decade-long gas dispute in the next few weeks. In case Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky do not reach an agreement on natural gas supplies to Ukraine, Europe will face another gas crisis, and most European leaders will hold Moscow responsible. I'm your host Kasim, and thanks for joining me for another KJ vid. In this video we will discuss the Russian-Ukraine gas dispute. Just before we start, please kindly visit our website kjvids.co.uk and subscribe to one of our plans which will give you unlimited access to our content and the full transcripts of these reports. Reportedly, Putin and Zelensky will meet on December the 9th, 2019 in Paris to discuss both the gas issue and the conflict in the Donbass. Although most mainstream media already speculate about the outcome of the Donbass talks, the two leaders are likely to pay more attention to the gas dispute. Ukraine and the vast majority of the EU countries are still heavily dependent on Russian gas and oil. A long-term Russia-Ukraine gas transit contract ends on December the 31st, and at this point it is highly uncertain if it will be renewed by the end of the year. Negotiations between Russian and Ukrainian energy authorities, mediated by the European Union, are complicated by a lengthy legal dispute between Russian energy giant Gazprom and Ukrainian Naftogaz. Their disagreements led to a Stockholm Arbitration Court ruling that Gazprom should pay $2.56 billion to Naftogaz. According to the EU Energy Commissioner Maros Sefcovic, Russia is seeking a package solution that should also include a political deal over the results from the Stockholm arbitration, which is something that Ukraine is not ready to discuss. Presently, Ukraine is not buying gas directly from Russia, but it is importing Russian natural gas from Slovakia. Kiev is interested in a long-term contract with Russian energy giant Gazprom as it looks to renew gas supplies from Russia. Moscow, on the other hand, offers a short-term deal as it hopes to finish the Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream pipelines that should bypass Ukraine. However, it remains to be seen if the Nord Stream 2 will be fully built or if the United States will pressure European countries to sabotage the project at the very last moment. Some analysts believe that this pipeline, even after fully completed, will not have the capacity to replace Ukraine as a transit country. On the other hand, the Turk Stream pipeline, which is seen as another alternative to Ukraine, certainly connects Russia and Turkey, but not the rest of Europe. It is unclear when and if at all planned follow-on projects to bring Russian gas from Turk Stream into Europe will be implemented. If the Kremlin decides to stop gas transit through Ukraine, which is not very likely, it will shoot itself in the foot. Both the United States and the European Union will blame Russia for gas shortages in Europe and will describe Gazprom as an unreliable partner. Recently, several European countries, according to reports, froze Gazprom assets after the company lost a legal battle against Ukrainian Naftogaz. The Kremlin will now likely have to make some compromises with Ukraine and the EU. Since the status of the Donbass will be on the table in Paris, it would not be improbable for Moscow to make certain concessions regarding this territory in order to get better gas arrangements with Ukraine. After the violent protests in Kiev's Maidan Square in 2013 and 2014, Russia effectively lost Ukraine. It kept control over Crimea, where Russian strategic military bases were located, and it also managed to keep the Donbass in its geopolitical orbit. Although Crimea and the Donbass make roughly about 8% of the whole Ukraine, those regions have significant importance, especially due to their natural resources. After Crimea was incorporated into the Russian Federation, Ukraine lost 80% of oil and gas deposits in the Black Sea, according to the country's energy ministry. The northwestern portion of the Black Sea holds estimated reserves of 495.7 billion cubic meters of natural gas and 50.4 million tons of oil and condensate. Some 70% of potential natural gas deposits of the Black Sea are concentrated around the shores of Crimea, and Russia is reportedly already exploiting them. Ever since the start of the Donbass conflict in 2014, Russian leadership's priority has been gas supplies and energy policy rather than keeping Ukraine in its sphere of orbit. If forced to choose between the Donbass and flawless gas transit to Europe, the Kremlin would rather pick gas. The problem for Moscow, however, is the fact that the Donbass is an energy-rich region and Russia through the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic de facto controls all the coal production from the Donbass. If Moscow gives up the self-proclaimed republics, it will lose not only a method of pressure on Kiev, but also significant natural resources. Presently, Ukraine is not buying coal from the Donbass republics directly, but it is importing energy from Russia. In other words, Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic are selling coal to Russia, and Moscow is then exporting the de jure Ukrainian energy resources to Kiev. If the Kremlin allows Ukraine to reinstate full control of its state border with Russia, which is something that both Ukraine and its Western sponsors insists on, Moscow will lose the de facto control of coal exploitation in the Donbass. At this point, it is unlikely that the Kremlin will capitulate to the Western demands, as such an action could send a clear message to entities such as Transnistria, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Also, if the Kremlin agrees to return the Donbass to Ukraine, the West would unlikely lift all the sanctions it imposed on Russia in the past 5 years. Instead, it would welcome progress towards peace, but probably would also put intense pressure on Russia to start the negotiation process with Ukraine over the status of Crimea. That is why some analysts believe that any form of reintegration of the Donbass into Ukraine would be seen as a sign of Russian weakness and might be the start of another conflict. It is worth mentioning that apart from Putin and Zelensky, European mediators will also take part in the upcoming Normandy talks in Paris. It is expected that the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Emmanuel Macron will join the Russian and Ukrainian leaders' discussion on gas dispute and the Donbass conflict. Even if Russia stops supplying gas to Europe through Ukraine, Germany will not be affected as it gets gas directly from Russia via the Nord Stream pipeline. It is Central and Southeastern Europe that would suffer the most, but many countries in those regions have already started looking for alternative gas suppliers, primarily the United States. It is America that will benefit in case of a no deal between Russia and Ukraine, since the United States, as the main backer of Ukraine, is not participating in the talks as it did not take part in the Minsk agreement signed in 2014 and 2015 either. It is extremely unlikely that there will be significant progress towards sustaining peace in the Donbass. Without a direct deal between Moscow and Washington, people in the Donbass will keep living as hostages of the geopolitical game played by Russia and the West. That's all for today guys, thanks for watching another KJ vid. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, especially if you are from Ukraine or Russia. Please don't forget to visit our website kjvids.co.uk and subscribe to one of our plans. Your support will help us keep creating more content and more analysis. Thanks for watching again and see you next time.